be joined today by Evan Gitomer. You can get me there, Evan, if I've got that surname wrong. Sorry. Evan is the president of the Strategic Sports Group based over in the US. So, Evan, it's great to have you with us today. Perhaps you can just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your background, career highlights, standout moments, that kind of thing.
Sure. And thanks so much, Katie. Thanks for having me and really appreciate the opportunity in these crazy times we're all living through to share ideas. We love, I always say we'd love to do it across leagues and teams, but I guess now we'll do it across oceans. So very, very happy to do that this morning. I'm coming up on it's almost 20 years of my sports career journey at this point. Spent a good chunk of my early time with different teams and leagues across various sales platforms, mainly around tickets. And so let's see, I started with the National Football League, American Football, National Hockey League, worked in National Basketball Association, and also the Arena Football League here in the US. And kind of started to, as I went through, I spent 13 years on the team side of things, in various roles, selling, leading, and started to kind of create a niche for myself in the space of premium sales and more broadly, probably business to business sales. So 13 years of that, and then the last 6 plus, have been on the consulting side. So formerly with a larger consulting firm, and now I'm about 7 or 8 months into operating my own shop, a little boutique sports, called a revenue maximization sports agency, to help teams just figure out ways to work through what are the craziest time many of us will ever see throughout our career. In terms of highlights, I'd probably tell you that it's the opportunity to work on new venues. So I've been fortunate to work in varying capacities on 7 different brand new stadium builds or major renovations. As great as it is to go through year to year, there's nothing quite like spending 3, 4, 2.5, whatever it ends up being, years working on a venue that becomes just part of the landscape and part of the history, really, of the city in which you're working in. So nothing quite like opening up a new venue, and especially more recently in my career, that's become an area that I've focused on more heavily. So just finished working on 2 new Major League Baseball stadiums here in the US, helped work on a complete arena transformation as well over the last couple of years for a tenant it's an arena that hosts about 200 events annually, but also hosts a basketball team as well. And then just kind of picking and choosing some of the other spaces to try to work in here too.
And it must be really interesting, from your sort of perspective, you've gone from being the team's view and seeing the challenges that the teams have and indeed the venues have. And now, you're coming at it from the other side as a consultant to the teams and the venues. And I know we touched on it just very briefly at the start of the interview there, the times that we're in at the moment. So when it comes to premium seating, for instance, how are you advising the clubs and teams and venues, can they sell premium seating? Should they be? How should they be, getting those premium sales? What advice would you give?
Katie, what I would tell you before even jumping ahead to what to do now or what to do in the future, it may make sense just to revisit kind of where premium sales fit into the general landscape to begin with. I've been telling people for a long time that I have felt premium sales is the most challenging part of the sales spectrum for sports and entertainment. If you think about it, there's ticket sales, there's premium sales, and then there would be your partnership or sponsorship sales. Anybody can be a ticket sales prospect. Anybody can buy tickets to an event. So that prospect list is endless. And then from a partnership perspective, companies are continuing to pump money into their marketing and advertising budgets. They keep hiring CMOs and high-level marketing folks that, you have to call them and you have to present a great idea, and you have to be able to find a way to make the partnership work. But I've still yet to call a company and say, hey, how much money do you still have in your suite budget this year? We'd love to spend some of that on a suite at our venue. So I've always thought it was the most challenging piece of the equation. So we already were kind of starting from a spot where we were a little bit behind the game, and now things have become a lot more challenging. I compare it, like the situation we're in right now, I compare most closely to working on Barclays Center in Brooklyn, New York. I was there right around the financial crisis. I was the first suite sales manager for that venue. And I was selling to a bunch of investment banks in 2008, kind of as the whole financial crisis started to hit. And it just caused everyone first of all, they were a lot worse off financially than they were previously. But then also coming out of it, they had a lot of trouble looking ahead. And people became very, very nervous, and they became very risk averse. And what it meant is instead of making decisions, people just wouldn't. It was more comfortable to not make any decision whatsoever. And I know early on in this pandemic, I thought, if it goes a couple months, then we'll probably be in a situation where things will go back to normal. Now, as we get closer to what's been a year that the world's been affected by this, I think we're going to have a lot of business people and business executives fall back into that mindset of being very, very cautious about what they do. If you think about it, if you're a company, and what people use premium seats and suites for is they use it to generate revenue, to generate some type of return on the investment that they're making. Now, all of a sudden, it's scary to think that I'm going to go out and spend a bunch of money on a suite, and my top clients and the prospects I'm looking to win business from aren't going to want to come because they don't feel safe. Or even if somehow we do get that suite, we do bring a prospect or a client out, and they trace back getting sick to being at our event, how's that going to help develop my relationship? That doesn't seem like a great way to really create that long synergistic relationship that we all crave in the business space. So what I'm urging people to do right now is to double, triple, quadruple down on the resources that they're providing for their premium sellers. It doesn't mean there's going to be a great return on it right now, but learning from that past experience and making those connections in the mindset of people right now, finding ways to stay relevant and to continue to provide value to people in those spaces will help ramp back up and get things back to normal, where we're selling businesses premium stuff in a more deliberate and quick fashion. That being said, short term, I think we really need to start chopping things up. I think that suites are transforming and premium seats are transforming to areas that people feel safe, if you will. So it's your fan with the means to do so, finding a way into a suite for a couple games because they feel safer around the people that are in their circle, if you will. So a lot less long-term stuff, which feels very, very weird to me. Because if you ask me from a consulting perspective 2 years ago, I would have pushed everybody. Look, you want to tie people up in the longest term deal you can. Revenue certainty is great. Your finance department's going to love that. It helps you for any type of renovation or anything else that you need to do with your club, because that's how you typically are able to generate financing based on your contractual agreements. But right now, I really think it's going back to the mindset of selling to fans versus selling to businesses. It has to be the highest price ticket or the greatest experience possible for a fan versus a business right now. And that's how we're all collectively going to keep our heads above water. But in the meantime, we need to continue to build that backbone and keep, I tell my salespeople all the time, either when I'm consulting with a sales organization or when I actually lead that sales team, your job is really just to make it worthwhile to talk to you. Business people love to talk to business people, and it sounds crazy because you use the word business so much in doing it, but business people talk to each other about doing business together, right? And if you can't be in that conversation, and if what you're bringing to that conversation doesn't have value, those people are going to take a step back. And depending on where you are in the world and where you are around whatever country you're in, I mean, different people have different mindsets. Some will be very direct when they tell you that. Some will be a little bit more passive when they tell you that. But you're not going to get real, true information and really move the sales process forward if you're not providing value to the conversation. And it's pretty easy to tell that. So for short term, I'm advising people to really start chopping things up. For long term, it's continuing to invest in the technology, in the resources, in the lead gen, in the gifting platforms that are going to help keep those people engaged, so that when you can flip the switch back on, it's a much easier, smoother, quicker process.
Yeah, that's it's very interesting there. I do think you're right that we'll see so many, especially of the sort of people in that 60 plus age, saying, no, I am not going back in the stand with thousands of others, but I wouldn't mind spending a couple of few more dollars or euros to be in a smaller space with fewer people. So that's a very interesting takeaway from that one. And then sort of taking that a step forward, how can the teams and the venues, how can they sort of tailor their programming to the current needs, and then almost, if possible, future-proof those then post-pandemic?
Mm-hmm. You bring up a great point, Katie. For those 60-year-old folks who are scared to get back in the venue, one of the craziest things I've seen, again, thinking back 2 or 3 years ago, I would have told you that we're only going to close business by sitting down face to face with someone. And it's been amazing to think how far technology has advanced. It's really not necessarily even the technology, but it's the comfort level with that technology. So for example, you and I are on Zoom today. I would have never thought that you could sell a premium space via Zoom. Now, all of a sudden, I think, and it's funny, I read a book recently that talked about how 2020 and everything around the pandemic has pushed the way business operates forward 10 years. So in the 9, 10 months, 11 months that we're in right now has really pushed things forward 10 years. And it means that we need to sell as if it's 2030 as opposed to 2021. Sorry, the book came out in 2020, so there's my challenging that. I love that concept. I thought that made a whole lot of sense, and I think that making sure we arm our people with the understanding that they need to be just as comfortable talking like this on Zoom, that our websites and our virtual technology has to be able to walk people through a space to a level that's not been seen before. That's just a necessity now. That's what the expectation is. You can buy anything. You can buy cars, you can buy homes, you can buy a suite. I mean, you can do anything virtually. So we need to make sure that we're in the space to do so. And to answer your question, sorry, I took a little bit of a roundabout way to get there, but buildings need to program a space. So we just talked about it being more individual. So if you looked at what a suite included before, it would be a lot of talk about, the privacy, the elements of being able to step away from the actions. You can have that business chat there. Now I think it's all about the safety of it. It's the exclusivity of it. It's the feeling comfortable and just doubling down the fact that, these are the most comfortable seats in the entire building. This is where food is going to be brought prepackaged to you, so you don't even have to get up and mix and mingle with anybody else, which used to a business client, speak exclusivity. Now it speaks safety. So it's just rebranding a little bit the way that you would take that to market and the way that you would think through that. And then again, as I mentioned before, I think chopping it up into smaller pieces helps a lot. I used to be a very big fan of downhill selling, is what I would call it. So what that meant is, you start up here. So if I was pitching you, Katie, I say, hey, you know what? I think it'd be great for you to have 4 of the best seats in the entire building for the next 5 years, every game. And if for some reason you fell off of that, then, okay, you know what? 5 years isn't gonna work. Let's do 3 years. That's not gonna work. Let's do 2 seats for 3 years and kind of work down that way. I think to keep people engaged, it's going to be starting to package things up smaller in a more comfortable, understanding way, and then building them back up. So again, I don't know if that's necessarily advice for the long term, but for right now, chopping things up and kind of making sure that people are still a part of the family and still engaging with your brand, your property, your team, your club, I feel is very, very important so that you can stay relevant.
And then, sort of taking that a step forward, obviously now we've got the vaccine rolling out, so there is finally light at the end of the tunnel. So, when we get to the, as you say, technology has fast forwarded. I think everyone can agree we're not going to go back. All venues will be, as far as they can be, cashless, touchless, all of that. But sort of, what other things do you see as being the key points that venues are going to have to sort of evolve that experience moving forward post-pandemic?
Mm-hmm. I feel people have really become comfortable with having everything at their fingertips. Um, it's not normal to think about having to wait for anything anymore. I don't leave my house that much these days. I don't, when I'm watching an event, I'm watching it on TV. I run to the fridge and grab whatever drink I want, whatever food I want. I pause it, I stop it whenever I need to, so I can go deal with my kids running frantic somewhere upstairs or whatever it may be. So I'm really programming the event to me. And I think for a long time, we as sports and entertainment executives have felt that we're kind of forcing the event on people. So I think it's going to be very, very important for us to figure out a way to feed into that mantra or that mindset of saying, I control the experience that I want. And making sure that whatever we spit back out when we all of a sudden have full venues again, still has that element of control for the individual. Because that's a hugely comfortable thing. People love to feel in control. That's why they hate to feel like they're being sold something. They're happily buying things, but they don't love to feel like they're being sold or pushed into something because they feel like they're losing control. So if we go back and we're force feeding things down people's throats, it's not going to be, it's not going to feel as friendly or as desirable as we certainly hope it would be. We're all banking, and I agree that there's going to be a lot of pent up demand, especially from a fan perspective. I think business is going to be a little bit slower to react to that. But again, by creating more of that control, flexibility, even if it's just a sense of it, should allow people to come back a lot quicker and help us rebuild some of those relationships that are going to deteriorate, not always necessarily due to our fault, but the longer things like this go, the more challenging it can become. I would tell you that I speak to at least one executive with a league or a club or a team per week who is deathly afraid of this extending out much longer because they've been able to keep a lot of the relationships in place. It's kind of been like, okay, we're all in this together type feeling. There's the goodwill that don't worry about it. I know we have a contract for your space, but we're okay to push that back toward the end. We'll hold your money still. But if this goes on much longer, there's going to have to be those very serious conversations, a lot more legal involvement in terms of rewriting contracts and agreements. And I think there are a lot of people who are hoping that we don't get to that point, but we are very, very, very close. And I think depending on the venue you're in, the sport you play, the timing of your season, or the way that you build out your agreements, there may even be some folks who are starting to run into that right now.
And then sort of almost like as a final sort of thoughts or final advice, sort of, I suppose, well, taking what you've learned over the last 2 decades in the sector, and I suppose particularly the financial crisis of the early noughties, so what advice would you give to the teams and the venues, sort of, what should they be doing now to prepare ready for the eventual, and it is coming, reopening?
It is. That's why we get out of bed every morning. We know it's coming. I would advise any organization, team, club, league, whatever it may be, to make sure that they're not thinking incredibly short term and giving up on the long term. In situations like this, it's very, very easy to look at the next 6 to 12 months as make or break, when in reality we're in for the long run. This is a long game that we're playing. So I think reinforcing the idea that you need to look to every resource you possibly can. It's a great time to be more engaged with your current client base. It's a much better time to show them how much you care, even more so today than it would be other times. Look to outside resources, whether that's helping support different parts of your sales process, whether it's looking for consultants to help you give an outsider's perspective, whether it's looking to technology to help automate some of the processes that aren't as needed as they once were. Again, we're selling like it's 2030, so we should be able to automate some of the things that we're doing at this point. I think those are incredibly important. And at the same time, I think that getting a strategic vision for what you want to accomplish for the next 5 years is important. Everyone I talked to came up with a plan that was going to get them through the pandemic. And most of those plans were 3 months long. And now they've just been kind of stringing them along and doing a little edit. Well, okay, we're still going to do that, but we're going to do it 3 months from now as opposed to right here. Well, that's not the best way to plan. That was the biggest change for me. You mentioned before, not to kind of bring this full circle here, but the biggest shift for me in jumping from team jobs that I did in the first 13 years of my career to jumping to the consulting side of the business is that I really was able to think more big picture, because there wasn't that pounding desire or need, in many instances, to hit a sales goal. It was more, okay, we're going to get to this point now because it's going to better position us to be at this spot 2 or 3 years from now. And that's hard. It's very, very hard to do. It takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes a lot of stepping away from the emotion of it and just being emotionless through the process. But it's incredibly important, and it really leads to better success. I mean, there's no way that anyone was prepared for what we've experienced over the last 10 or 11 months. But those who had a vision and were thinking out far enough ahead, in what I've seen and what I've heard and through conversations I've had, the people that had some type of game plan that was beyond what was directly in front of their face have handled this a lot better than those who weren't able to do so.
Perfect. That was great advice there. Some great insights. Thank you so much, Evan. I hope that in the not too distant, we can actually meet up face to face, maybe even at ALSD later this year. But for now, thank you so much. And thanks again for your time.
All right. Thanks, Katie. I would love that. That'd be perfect.